It's finally time for another TellTale The Walking Dead video. It feels like it has been far too long since I produced one of these videos. My Iceberg is such a tremendously well supported video, and I cannot thank you guys enough for all the support on that one. I have recently started doing a lot of commentary videos about various different games and different aspects of the Walking Dead franchise. Please do let me know if there are any other commentary videos you want me to try out, or any other games you want me to make them on. But anyway, for today's video, I am discussing what makes the protagonists in TellTale's The Walking Dead so iconic and effective at making you as the player feel attached and invested in these characters before they are eventually slaughtered in front of you at the hands of the walkers. I'm going to be discussing the three protagonists, Lee, Clementine, and Harvey. I'm not discussing Michonne in this video, as that game is much more of a spin-off of the TV show as opposed to the games. Anyway, without further ado, let's start with Lee. Lee is the first character we are ever introduced to in the Walking Dead game franchise. He is a convicted murderer who was on his way out of Atlanta as the apocalypse really started to take off. While driving to the prison, Lee is in a devastating car crash that sees the police car he is in fly off the road and down a hill into a forest. This crash kills the police officer that Lee is with and injures Lee's leg, which leads to Lee struggling to climb out the vehicle. When Lee climbs out the vehicle and he sees a little girl on the top of the hill, his story in the apocalypse truly begins. Lee is one of those characters that when you are initially playing the game, you think he is going to be untouchable, and that he will survive through the entire franchise. This is part of what made the character of Lee grow to be so iconic. When he gets bitten at the end of episode 4, no one playing it originally would have expected he would have been infected by a walker. He also creates lasting, strong relationships with the franchise's most iconic characters, such as Kenny, Krista, and Omid. His relationship he can build with Kenny in particular is so iconic as well. If you play the game siding with Kenny throughout the majority of the story, you get somewhat of a brother character for Lee, similar to that of Rick and Daryl from the TV show. Kenny is one of my favorite characters within the games, and it's partially down to whether you play the game siding with him or against him. I think the part of Lee's character I like is that he is prepared to help Kenny. He helps put down Duck so that he doesn't turn into a walker. He saves Duck from the walkers at the farm, and he also can protect Duck in the drugstore. I quite like that a lot of Lee's aid to Kenny largely revolves around his son. Lee has to make some difficult decisions throughout the game, as previously mentioned, but he makes these decisions based on his main objective throughout the game, protecting Clementine. His aim throughout the game is to ensure that Clementine has the skills she needs to protect herself in the event that Lee is killed off, or if Lee and Clementine get separated. Lee finds Clementine as a terrified girl who has lost her parents and her sister-like guardian babysitter. But when Clementine has to leave Lee behind when he is infected, she has to make a difficult decision, much like Lee throughout the entire game prior. Does she let Lee turn, or does she kill him? Lee has had to teach Clementine to feel confident making these decisions without fear of the outcomes. Lee has to make some really difficult decisions too. Does he help Kenny bash Larry's brains out, or help Lily resuscitate her father? Does he kill both the cannibal brothers, or leave them alive? Does he shoot Duck for Kenny, or allow Kenny to do it? It's not easy to do, but the character of Lee is designed to show Clementine how to make these decisions, and that they should never be easy decisions. Lee has to make these decisions to protect Clementine. The only major character that matters from Lee's decisions is Clementine, and almost every decision will impact Clementine in some different way. A part of Lee's character that also makes him so largely complex and deep, with multiple layers, is the part of Lee's story before he was in that police car. Lee's backstory is widely unknown for a chunk of the first game. Don't initially know why he's in the police car, but we do find out that Lee was engaged and trying to have a baby with his partner. However, they were having difficulty conceiving, so went to see a fertility doctor. The fertility doctor was helping them to conceive, but unfortunately, Lee was not in the room for this. Lee, in a frenzied rampage, killed the fertility doctor and was found red-handed and tried as guilty in court to murder. This entire fiasco showcases how complex Lee's character is, and that he is not a saint that he was depicted as for protecting Clementine, but rather he was in fact a murderer and a convict. In the final moments of the game, when Lee is chained up in the jewelry store, the most emotional moment within the entirety of the franchise, which led to numerous content creators being distraught over the harsh decisions and the slow, agonizing way that they killed Lee. Lee's death takes a considerable amount of time to happen, which gives him a last little moment to teach Clementine how to take out walkers and impart some wisdom as to whether or not to stay on her own or to find another group. Lee's character is one of the most iconic within the franchise. He's the face of the first game, and he leaves more of a lasting impression on Clementine than arguably I would say her parents did. He was there for her. If he had not found Clementine when he did, she probably would have starved to death in the treehouse. Clementine's story throughout Season 2, 3, and 4 is all thanks to Lee's insistence on training her, giving her morals, and keeping her safe as she started to grow up in this ever-changing world of the apocalypse. Lee is probably the protagonist solely responsible for the development of this franchise, and I don't think this franchise would ever have been what it was had Lee not been around in that first season. We've spoken quite in depth about Lee Everett, so why not talk about his little partner in crime, Clementine? We meet Clementine when she is hiding in a treehouse at the beginning of the first episode of the first season. She is scared. She has lost her babysitter and a sister-esque character, Sandra. Clementine seems as a scared, defenseless girl, and this is pretty much how the writers at TellTale depicted her from the beginning. But it makes sense. She is a little girl who is suddenly forced to grow up and not be a child anymore in a world where just about everything is going to try and kill her at every step of the way. Clementine has to make sacrifices in the first episode. She has to cut her hair, she has to put herself in scary positions, and she has to witness so many horrors of this new world, including the death of numerous characters. Worst of all, she has to kill or leave Lee. Clementine has the hardest decision to make in the entire franchise. Does she kill Lee or does she leave him behind to turn? It's a lose-lose situation. It's one of the only decisions within the franchise that leads to no good outcome. If Lee turns, Clementine has to deal with the fact that she allowed her guardian to turn to a walker, but didn't have to kill him. On the other hand, she kills Lee, and she has to deal with the heartfelt trauma of killing the closest person to her in this apocalyptic universe. Clementine has massively changed from the first episode to the last episode of the first game. In the first episode, we see a small, weak girl who has just witnessed the death of her babysitter and is starving to death in a treehouse. Become the final episode, she is walking in herds with walkers. She's covering herself in their guts and then dragging Lee into a jewelry store so that he does not die in this herd. Then comes the second game. And this is the first game where Clementine finds herself alone in the apocalypse. After Clementine is ambushed in a public restroom, the attacker kills Omid in front of her, which causes Krista to lose all sense of will. Time flashes forward, and Krista and Clementine are camping, untrusting any other groups within the apocalypse. This is when they once again get attacked by a group of scavengers, and Clementine falls into a river and is washed up completely alone. Clementine is suddenly in a situation she has never been in. She is alone. For the first time since she found Lee, Clementine then goes on to eventually find... Clementine is suddenly in a situation she has never been in. She is alone for the first time since she found Lee. Clementine then goes on to eventually find a group of survivors at a small house. Clementine is wounded from a dog bite, and this group is not particularly trusting of Clementine and believe her wound is actually a walker bite. Clementine has to make even more difficult decisions and witness even more atrocities as the world that Clementine lives in is truly revealed. The living are just as bad as the dead. The key part of this season and future seasons is the people coexisting in the apocalypse are all out to kill each other. In this episode, we meet Carver, a truly evil villain who has taken many casualties. Clementine knows that Carver is after the group that Clementine has found, and as such, they escape to a ski lodge where Clementine finds a forgotten part of her past, Kenny. The game continues as you would expect. Clementine has to try and protect the group from the atrocities of Carver, while also trying to protect herself from the new dangers of this world. By the time the group escapes from Carver, Clementine is faced with a decision. Does she watch Kenny kill Carver, or does she leave with the group? Now, this decision shows Clementine's growth since the last season, because in the first game, when you kill Danny St. John of a dairy, Clementine lets out a squeal and gets scared, but now she is for some reason prepared to watch a living human get beat to death. Another decision Clementine has is actually at the end of the episode, when Kenny's new missus, Sarita, gets bitten in the escape from the hardware store. Clementine has to make the decision to chop off Sarita's hand or leave her behind. You do not get good time to decide this, and this is where the format of TellTale games really comes into effect. You have to make horrible decisions in split seconds, and this is what showcases Clementine's character fully. Later on in the game, Clem has even more decisions to be made, and to make matters worse, she is now essentially a child who is having to mother a newborn baby, AJ. One decision that I think is the biggest decision Clementine has to make is whether or not to kill Kenny or kill Jane in the final fight of the second game. This is the first time Clem has to make an active decision as to who to save and therefore who gets killed. There is no sitting in the middle on these decisions anymore. It's the end for Clementine's innocence, and therefore she has to make this decision for the first time. Come season 3 of the game, we learn a bit more about Clementine's beliefs about the world that they are living in. After the events of season 2 and the off-screen death of Kenny, Clementine seems to have lost all trust for groups within the apocalypse, and to protect herself and her little sidekick, she decides to not join any groups, and to protect herself above all else. This is until Clementine meets Ava. Ava is a part of a faction called the New Frontier, a large military organization that protects the people within their walls by pillaging from nearby outposts and taking everything from these communities. Ava invites Clementine and AJ into this group, and Clementine can choose to accept or deny this, but either way she ends up in the group. When Clementine joins the New Frontier, she is forced to steal medical supplies from them to give to AJ in an attempt to save his life. As a result, AJ is taken away from Clementine, and she vows then and there that she will take down the New Frontier and get back AJ. And this is exactly what she does. She goes on to attempt to kill the doctor that was refusing to help AJ, and this is a determinant death, as Clementine can be talked out of it. Clementine then once again decides to go on her own way at the end of the season. She has to go and find AJ. She now has an inclination as to where he is, and she is eager to find AJ. The arc of Clem and AJ is the exact same as the arc between Clementine and Lee. Clementine went missing in the first game, and Lee did everything to find her. And now AJ is missing, and Clementine is doing everything in her power to find him and get him back. The events of the 3 games we have seen so far have led to Clementine becoming increasingly afraid of large groups within the apocalypse, and now she much prefers the isolation of being on her own with AJ. And she knows that she is with the only remaining person that she can trust within the world of The Walking Dead. Season 3 comes around, and this is the season where you truly realize the depth and difference to Clementine's character. After a year of searching for the McCarroll's ranch, she finds AJ and his protectors who are trying to kill her. So she slaughters all of them, and finds AJ huddled up in a corner. This straight away is the key indication that Clementine has changed drastically. She is no longer afraid of killing, almost as though she has lost her sensitivity to murder. But at the same time, she has decided that she has to do everything she can to get back Alvin Jr. 2 years pass from this event, and Clementine and AJ are on their own. 3 years after Richmond, they are holed up in a train station, which becomes overrun with walkers. She takes out a majority of them, and then is swarmed trying to get back into their car, when suddenly we hear gunshots of an unidentified group taking out the walkers, and Clementine passes out. When Clem wakes up, she's in a school. And this is where shit really hits the fan for Clementine or AJ. The school is full of children who have evidently lost their families throughout the course of the apocalypse. This group is quite volatile. There is another threat out there, an unknown group which has been taking kids from this compound for a while now. Clementine discovers this after the leader of the group, Marlon, kills Brody with a mortal wound. Clementine is given the decision as to whether she exiles Marlon, locks him in the basement, or forgives him. This is a difficult decision for Clementine to make in the heat. Clementine has lost control. She was making the majority of the decisions for the two of them, but AJ has just taken it upon himself to execute Marlon for handing over Tennessee's sisters. This is probably the first example of a decision being taken away from Clementine since season 1. And throughout the final game, we see this a lot more. The point of this game is similar to season 1. Clementine is teaching AJ to survive without her being present. But AJ has only ever lived in this apocalypse. He does not remember a time when there were morals or laws, and to AJ this all seems fine, and that it needed to be done to protect him and Clementine. Season 4 is all about teaching AJ how to work well within a group. His social skills are intolerable and horrendous, but he has never been in a group. He has only ever known and lived with Clementine throughout his life. Then we re-encounter Lily. Lily from the first season. Who would have guessed? And we see Clementine fighting against an old villain from the initial days of the outbreak. Clem has to fight against the manipulation of Lily, and one part of the conversation between them is where Lily says that Clem's death is inevitable while she is protecting AJ, just as Lee's death was also inevitable while he was protecting Clem. Towards the end of the game, Clementine's story has come full circle. Clementine and AJ are escaping after taking out the group that was trying to abduct the high school kids. Clementine is injured, but still going. She's climbing up a rock away from a horde of walkers, but she gets bit on the ankle. She makes it up the cliff face, and she runs to James's barn. Clementine gives AJ 2 options. He can kill her to stop her turning, or let her turn. This is the exact parallel to the first ever ending to the first game, but there's a third option which AJ takes, and AJ amputated the infected part of her leg. Clementine's character is who the entire story of TellTale's The Walking Dead was made for. The story was designed for her. It was never Lee or Harvey or Kenny or any of these characters. It was always about showing Clem's development, from the weak, senseless girl we see in the beginning, to the woman at the end who risked everything to protect AJ, the exact same way that Lee protected her from the first game. Clementine is one of the characters in this universe that is so iconic and so memorable to the point where Clementine is now the sole face of the franchise as a whole. Harvey is the first character protagonist introduced that did not appear within the first episode of the games. Harvey was a baseball enthusiast who took guardianship of his brother's wife and kids after he went missing. Harvey had to protect the three of them, Gabe, Mariana, and Kate, from the horrors of the apocalypse. Harvey does this for close to 4 years after the outbreak. He has protected these people who have come to see him as a parental figure, and on top of this he is doing the good old devil's tango with his sister-in-law as well. This family was not originally his, but he has certainly embedded himself into it. They have been on the road for 4 years, barely setting up anywhere for longer than a couple of days. They have been traveling for 4 years consistently, and when they come across a junkyard, where they decide to stop and search for supplies, of which they found plenty. They hold up in a small cabin in the junkyard, and Harvey went to siphon some gas from a nearby car. This is where he was attacked by looters and taken away from the junkyard in a van. Harvey is only taken away because he was trying to protect his family, which showcases Harvey's character as protective of a family that technically isn't even his, which is a real testament to his character. When David is back in the picture, Harvey is torn as to whether or not he should still be a caretaker to these kids, and Kate is completely willing to look out for David as well, despite him being one of the lieutenants of a tyrannical community known as the New Frontier. The thing that sets Harvey up as a good character is when they eventually take out the New Frontier in full and are recovering the community from ruin. This is where Harvey steps up and shows that he is fully able to lead the leftover people of the New Frontier in a community that can bring together all of the shattered communities around the colony. Harvey is nowhere near as depth-filled as the other two protagonists. He has elements of his story that differentiate from Clementine and Lee, such as he was with the same group of people for 4 years and never really saw anyone else, whereas Clementine and Lee had different groups that just didn't last like that. 4 years is a while to develop in the apocalypse, and the story of Harvey is the first that showcases the discovery of communities late into the apocalypse when they've all become corrupt and tyrannical. The characters within TellTale's The Walking Dead are designed to make you feel emotionally invested in their stories by making aspects of their stories not as visible on the surface, such as Lee's convict background or Clementine's deep sense of loss after Lee's death. These characters are designed to be complex and hard to read from the surface, and it's why this game became as big as it did. One thing I would love to see though is Skybound produce another game about Harvey and the New Frontier, because then I feel like all three of the protagonists would have the chance to fully develop their characters and they'd be all much more on par, because Harvey is certainly lacking. Thanks everyone who watched this video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. I know you guys are enjoying a lot of my Walking Dead content at the moment, and I don't want to lose my momentum for this content. If you guys could, please do check you are subscribed, as it helps out so much, and it really does make a difference in terms of keeping my content alive. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you want to see down below, and like always, peace out guys. Have a good one.